The badge reader blinked red when I touched my card to it. Not the slow amber it does when the system's lagging. Flat red, immediate. I stood there in the hallway for a second and told myself it was a glitch. It wasn't a glitch. I'd worked at Norfield Infrastructure Solutions for 19 years. 19 years of early mornings and late nights, of driving through Edmonton winters in the dark because a client's system had gone down and I was the only one who knew how to bring it back up. I built the asset monitoring platform from scratch, not managed it, not inherited it. Built it, line by line, architecture decision by architecture decision, in a basement office with a space heater that rattled when the temperature dropped below -20 outside. The platform was called SENTINEL. We used it to track structural load data across industrial facilities, oil sands operations, pipeline relay stations, remote processing plants. By the time I was 44, SENTINEL was running in 41 facilities across Alberta and British Columbia, and Norfield had just signed a licensing agreement with a firm out of Calgary that was worth more than anything the company had done in its first decade of existence. None of that was on my mind when I drove to the office that Tuesday morning. What was on my mind was that my daughter's university tuition was due in 3 weeks, and that my wife had mentioned at breakfast that the roof was showing ice damming again along the north edge, and that in about 90 days I was due to receive a performance bonus of $85,000 that I had earned twice over. The badge reader blinked red. I went down to reception and asked Patrice at the front desk to call up to HR. She gave me a look I didn't understand at the time. She made the call quietly. Within 4 minutes, a man I'd seen maybe twice in the previous 6 months came down and asked me to follow him to a room on the second floor that I had never been in before. There was a box on the table with my name on it. Inside were the things from my desk. The photo of my wife and daughter from our trip to Tofino. My coffee mug from the Provincial Engineers Conference in 2019. A thumb drive I'd been looking for since January. The man told me my position had been eliminated as part of a structural reorganization. He slid a paper across the table. 2 weeks of severance. I was 51 years old. I didn't say anything for a moment. I looked at the paper. I looked at the box. Who authorized this? I asked. He told me it had come from the VP of Operations. The VP of Operations had been in his role for 7 months. His name was Ashton Briggs. He was the son-in-law of our CEO. I drove home on autopilot. The white mud was slick, and I don't remember most of it. I sat in my driveway for a while with the engine running because I wasn't ready to go inside and tell my wife what had happened. She was working a half day, home by noon. I had maybe 40 minutes. I called my old friend instead. He'd been an engineer at Norfield himself. Retired now, living down in Lethbridge. He'd actually been part of the original hiring committee that brought me on back when the company was still small enough that everyone fit in one boardroom for the Christmas party. He picked up on the second ring. "They let me go this morning," I said. There was a pause. Then, "That doesn't make any sense." "What about the Hartwell deal?" "The Hartwell deal. Right. I hadn't even thought about it in those first hours." That's how disorienting the morning had been. The Hartwell deal was an acquisition agreement. A Vancouver-based infrastructure technology company called Hartwell Pacific was purchasing Norfield for $380 million. The deal had been in the works for 14 months. It was supposed to close in late spring. Everyone knew about it. The reason the company was worth anything close to that number was because of SENTINEL. And there was something else that almost nobody knew about. 19 years ago, when I was hired, the company was small and somewhat chaotic, and the founder, a man named Arthur Morrow, who had since retired to the island, had negotiated my compensation package personally. Arthur was an engineer himself. He understood what he was asking me to build. He also understood that what he was asking me to build was, at that stage, speculative. The salary was modest. The bonus structure was tied to performance milestones. But there was another clause. A single paragraph buried in the appendix of my employment contract, written in plain language because Arthur didn't like lawyers making things complicated. It said that if my cumulative bonus payments over the course of my employment failed to reach a total threshold of $350,000 by the time I separated from the company, the intellectual property rights to any proprietary systems I had developed during my tenure would transfer to me personally upon separation. I had been paid in total $265,000 in bonuses over 19 years. The $85,000 bonus I was owed in 90 days would have pushed me over the threshold. They fired me 91 days before that payment was due. I don't know if they knew about the clause. I have asked myself that question many times since, and I still don't have a clean answer. What I do know is that Ashton Briggs had been quietly reviewing compensation structure since he arrived, and that there had been a memo circulated about legacy contractual obligations that I wasn't supposed to have seen but did, because Patrice had accidentally included me on an email thread before catching herself. I sat in my driveway and I told my old friend about the clause. He was quiet for a long time. "You need to call a lawyer today," he said. "Not tomorrow, today." My wife came home and I told her over tea at the kitchen table. She's a practical woman, my wife. She works as a school administrator. She has dealt with budget cuts and policy rewrites and board members who don't understand what schools actually need. And she has never once in 23 years of marriage made me feel worse about a problem than I already felt. She listened to all of it. Then she asked, "Do you still have the original contract?" I did. Filed in a binder in my home office behind the T4s from 2005 to 2012. She nodded. "Call a lawyer. I found one through a referral. For labor and employment lawyer in Edmonton who had done work for a former colleague of mine when that colleague had a non-compete dispute a few years back. Her name was Adrian. She was direct in a way I appreciated immediately. She read the clause. "This is enforceable," she said, "even after 19 years. Contracts don't expire because they're old. This clause is clear. The threshold wasn't met. They separated you before it could be met." She paused. "The question is whether they knew what they were doing." I told her about the memo. She paused again. "Do you have a copy of the email thread?" I did. I had screenshot it when I realized I wasn't supposed to have seen it. She told me we needed to act quickly. If Hartwell Pacific was proceeding with the acquisition, they would conduct due diligence on the IP assets. Sentinel would be central to that process. If the IP rights had already transferred to me by the terms of the original contract, there was a significant problem in the chain of title. She sent a formal notice to Northfield's legal department within the week. The call I received 4 days later was from a lawyer I had never spoken to before, speaking in a tone of controlled professionalism that I recognized as poorly concealed alarm. He told me there had been an administrative error in my separation. He said the company wished to discuss a resolution. I let Adrian take those calls. She did it well. What the company wanted was a simple sign-off. A document acknowledging that the IP rights remained with Northfield. In exchange, they were offering me the $85,000 bonus I was owed, plus an additional settlement of $40,000 and a letter of reference. I talked to Adrian about it for a long time. I talked to my wife about it. I called my old friend again and sat on the phone with him for almost an hour while he walked around his yard. "What do you actually want out of this?" Adrian asked me. I thought about it. I didn't want to own Sentinel. I had built it, and I was proud of it, but I didn't want to become a software licenser at 51. I wasn't equipped for that, and I didn't have the appetite for it. What I wanted was to be treated fairly for 19 years of work. What I wanted was for Ashton Briggs to understand that the man he had removed from the building with a box of his belongings was not a disposable administrative line item. And I wanted the Hartwell deal to feel this. Adrian made a counter-proposal. We were not signing away the IP rights for $125,000. We were prepared to transfer the IP rights in exchange for full payment of the outstanding bonus. A severance package commensurate with 19 years of service under Alberta's employment standards, and an additional sum that reflected the value of the IP itself to the acquisition. The additional sum we proposed was $1.2 million. The lawyer on the other end of the line did not respond immediately. I know because Adrian told me about it afterward. She said there were about 6 seconds of silence before he said he would need to consult with his clients. What followed was 3 weeks of back and forth that I mostly stayed out of. Adrian handled it. I went for long walks along the river valley with my wife. I watched hockey. I tried not to check my phone every 40 minutes and largely failed at that. My daughter called from university during that stretch. She knew something was happening, but not the details. I told her things were being worked out. She said, "Dad, you built that thing. They can't just take it." She's studying engineering herself. That made it harder to stay off my phone. The Hartwell acquisition had a closing deadline. These things always do. And the closer that deadline got, the more pressure was accumulating on Northfield's side of the table, because a $380 million deal cannot close cleanly when there is a contested IP claim sitting in the middle of the primary asset. I found out later, through Adrian, that there had been an internal meeting at Northfield at which Ashton Briggs had been asked to explain how this situation had come to exist. I found out that the original clause had not in fact been discovered during his compensation review. He had not known about it. He had fired me because he wanted to restructure the technical team and bring in people he'd worked with at his previous employer, and he had chosen me because I was the most senior and therefore the most expensive. He had not read my contract before making that decision. He had read it after. Northfield came back with a revised offer. The additional sum had moved significantly. They were proposing $350,000, which combined with the bonus and severance brought the total to approximately $480,000. I talked to Adrian for a long time about this. It's less than what we asked for, she said, but it's real money and it closes this chapter. What happens if we hold? She explained the risks. Litigation is slow. The Hartwell deal might restructure or fall through for other reasons entirely, leaving us with a contested claim against a company that no longer had acquisition money flowing through it. The clause was enforceable but novel. No judge had ruled on something quite like it, and there was uncertainty. I don't want to spend years on this, I told her. I know, she said. What would you do? She said she couldn't answer that, but she said the offer on the table was serious and it was in writing. I talked to my wife that night. We sat at the kitchen table the same way we'd sat there the morning I told her I'd been let go. She wrapped her hands around her mug and she said, "What does your gut say?" My gut said that $480,000 was more than I had expected when I sat in that driveway with the engine running. My gut said that SENTINEL would keep running whether I owned it or not, and that the 41 facilities depending on it would be fine, and that the engineers who maintained it, the ones I had trained, would still be doing good work. My gut also said that Ashton Briggs was going to have a very uncomfortable quarter, and that was enough. I told Adrian to accept the offer. The money arrived in stages. The bonus payment first, then the severance, then the IP transfer sum. We paid off the mortgage on the house which we had 9 years left on. We set aside enough for my daughter's remaining tuition and the first year of whatever she does after graduation. We fixed the roof. We booked a trip to see my wife's sister in Halifax that we had been putting off for 4 years. I was sitting in the backyard one evening in July later that summer when my old friend called. "I heard the Hartwell deal closed," he said. "It did," I said. "How do you feel?" "I thought about it." The yard was quiet. We have a spruce tree that my daughter and I planted when she was 7, and it's taller than the fence now. The evening light in Edmonton in July sits low and golden for hours and doesn't really go anywhere until almost 10 o'clock. "I feel fine," I said, and I meant it. I don't know exactly what happened in the boardroom at Northfield after everything settled. I don't know what was said to Ashton Briggs, or whether he was asked to account for his decision, or whether it was quietly absorbed into the category of things companies don't discuss. I know that he's still listed as VP of Operations on the company website, or was the last time I checked, which was once in a while ago. What I know is that I spent 19 years building something real. And when someone decided that 19 years didn't count for much, it turned out a paragraph on page 11 of a contract I had signed before that person had ever set foot in the building counted for quite a bit. I'm consulting now. Smaller engagements. Industrial clients who need someone who understands load monitoring systems and doesn't need to be explained to. The work is good. I set my own hours. Last February I drove my daughter to the airport and she flew to Zurich for a semester abroad, and I stood in the departures drop-off lane for probably 30 seconds longer than I should have before the cars behind me started moving. My wife says I seem lighter. I think she's right.